see the Lord, and His train fills the temple.
On Sunday, you talked a little bit more about sexual sin, and unfortunately, there's a lot of sexual sin in the church, but there's also a lot of molestation in the family, like you mentioned incest just now. So, and you mentioned, I never forget, I was riding in the car with you and Pastor Marcia years ago, and I think I mentioned a statistic. It was something like, I had read that like 25% of all women in the United States had been molested, and you said, oh, it's way more than that.
Yeah.
Everybody we pray for almost, has experienced that, and it's very sad and unfortunate. And many times I know people feel guilty or they feel shame, because those things have happened, and it bleeds into marriage, and it just affects so much of their life. So how do you address the guilt and shame when somebody's been through that?
Yeah, I think what people have to understand is when the molestation happens or the sexual perversion or happens to you, especially if you're a child, you were not, really wanting to participate. It was against you, and you didn't have anything to do about it, like rape or something like that. So those spirits, sexual spirits, come in. This is why sometimes people turn into sexual promiscuity or homosexuality or lesbianism, because they were molested. And what I always try to explain to them is that number one, it wasn't your fault, and the devil wants to say it's because you did this or you didn't do that, and
right, or if I just hadn't been there,
if
or
I
if
hadn't been
born,
or if I didn't fight hard enough, or and so I try to explain to people that the shame and guilt come in with it, so that itself is demonic. So the shame comes in, the spirit of shame, the spirit of guilt, to make you hate yourself, feel bad about yourself, feel rejected. And so I explain to them that those things that you feel, those themselves are spirits also. And I try to get them to understand that, hey, it wasn't your fault. Just because that happened to you doesn't mean you're bad, or that God's against you. That you did not willfully participate. It was something that happened to you, and it was an enemy that did that. So I get them to try to refocus and not focus on how bad they are, or that it was their fault, or there's something evil in them, and try to explain to them, that, hey, it's not you that did that, and it wasn't something wrong with you that caused that. It was an enemy that did it, And so, usually after you talk to them about that, they understand that, and then you can go in and get rid of the shame, the guilt, that they feel.
Yeah.
And many times they won't forgive themselves because they feel like it's their fault. And so you have to really kind of talk them through that and get them to say, and in many cases, forgive themselves, And even though they didn't do anything, they have anger towards themselves, and they feel like they're the reason.
Yeah.
So you kind of spend a lot of time counseling and ministering, in the spirit before you do the deliverance, so that then they can release that stuff. So that's pretty much the way I do it.
Yeah. And I think it's so beautiful in Isaiah 53 where it says that the Lord bore our shame, and He
took our guilt.
He took our guilt.
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll pray that the guilt goes back to the body of Jesus 2,000 years ago, because that's where it belonged.
Yeah.
And then you have to go back there and get out of this person, and command the demon to leave, And so He took all that for us, and that's the reason we can get delivered today. A good point, that Jesus took all this.
Yeah.
And so He bore the curses, He bore our iniquities, and that's why now we can come in the name of Jesus. We can get these things off of people.
Yeah. Do you want to briefly just touch on, because I know some people might be listening us, talk about the law a lot, and I don't want people to get confused and think that we're promoting legalism at all. And I, if anything, I've learned from you more than anyone that what God is looking for is love.
Love,
that
yeah.
love is the fulfillment of
Right.
God's law. That's
Exactly.
all that matters. And so, but do you want to kind of just
Yeah,
explain
well,
that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's one thing to try to obey a certain set of rules in the flesh.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this. I want to do this.
Right.
It's another thing to be led by the Spirit. And so, the law, as a believer, when you come to the Lord, the Spirit of God, it says, writes the law in your heart. So now the law is written here instead of on tablets of stone. So you don't look at this set of laws here and say, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that, I better not do this, I better do, it's here. And so by the Spirit of God in you, you obey the law by the Spirit. It's not, I've got to just obey these rules, because the Bible says, if your heart condemns you, God is greater than your heart and knows all things. So how does the law work today? It works because it's written on your heart. The law is a ministry of condemnation. So when you break the law, you're condemned. So when the law is written on your heart and you break God's law, your heart is going to condemn you.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to. So a lot of people get really confused about, well, there's no condemnation. It says there's no condemnation to those who are in Christ, and to those in Christ. That means those who are obeying. You can study that in 1 John. So just because you are saved doesn't necessarily mean you're in Christ 100%. So because he says, God is greater than your heart and knows all things. If your heart does not condemn you, you have confidence before God because you keep His commandments. So when you keep God's commandments by the Spirit, your heart doesn't condemn you.
Yeah.
But if you're not obeying, then your heart condemns you.
Yeah.
Then you know you broke the law. But the whole law is not like a set of do's and don'ts. The whole law is really love your neighbor and love God. And then Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments.
Right.
And the main commandment is love your brother. So if you do that, you fulfill the whole law.
Yeah.
You don't have to go down and make sure you don't eat catfish or shrimp, or that you have to keep the Sabbath, and all those things, because that's not going to make you righteous, The Sabbath is the rest. We enter into God's rest. How do you enter into rest? Rest from your enemies. That means you walk in obedience to God. So you enter God. There's a Sabbath rest that remains for the people of God. So the Sabbath day was a picture of what the Sabbath rest is supposed to be like, where you are rest from your enemies and the demons are gone and you're obedient and you're in rest. Nothing condemns you and judges you.
Yeah.
And it says in I think it's Hebrews 10, if you go on sinning willfully, there's no sacrifice, but a certain terrifying expectation of judgment and the fire, fear of fire, which consumes. The fire is the demons. The judgment is the demons. So if you deliberately disobey and say, I'm going to rebel, then it opens the door for the demons, So, so that's kind of the way that works.
Yeah. Amen. So good. Well, just to wrap up today, we've touched on so many things. But, if somebody's wanting to get started in deliverance ministry, and, obviously you had to start from kind of nowhere, and how would you recommend they get started and really, what do you kind of need to know before you jump in? And
Well, my case, I'm not saying my case is the typical case. I think there are many people that end up doing it the way I did, and it would just happen. As I was praying for people, the demons began to manifest, and I don't know why that happened. For years I'd pray, nothing happened, but one day it started happening, and so I got into the deliverance ministry. So it was just, I think in my case, a sovereign move of God, and then He started taking me down a road of like 6 intensive years of training, where I learned. On the job, and I didn't really have anybody to teach me. I didn't really have books or anything like that. So the Lord trained me. I think the thing that helped me was that I knew the Word. I had a pretty good knowledge of the Word. And so that, I think, number one, to do deliverance and not have a knowledge of the Word is probably dangerous.
Very dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
I think that you can do a lot of damage, and I know I didn't do everything perfect, and I know I made a lot of mistakes and probably caused some problems with some people trying to do things that I didn't understand, but it's just part of the learning process. But if you really want to do deliverance, you need to know the Word. You need to be a student of the Word. You need to love the Word. You need to know the Word. Yeah. And if you don't do that, if you don't know that, you're going to have a hard time doing it.
We wouldn't recommend it.
We
wouldn't recommend
I wouldn't recommend it
if you're not going to be.
I think the other thing is if you know somebody that is involved in deliverance and they know what they're doing, put yourself underneath them and learn from them and learn what they know. It would have been a lot easier for me, I think, if I'd have been under somebody, but in my case, I didn't have that opportunity. But a lot of people that are in our church now and people I've known in the past, they didn't really know about deliverance, but they came underneath me and learned from me, and now they do it as good as I do and know as much as I do. And, I've got a lot of people in our church that are very, very gifted in deliverance, and I think there will be some people that are...
Mission impossible.
Wow. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
There will be some people that naturally gravitate to that or have a calling to do deliverance in a greater way. Some maybe not. Yeah. It's not a ministry for everybody. Although I think everybody can or should cast out demons, but the quote deliverance ministry, I think, is a little different. And it requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of dedication, a lot of work, and not everybody's willing to do that, or not everybody's actually called to do that. But you can learn, like when we go on mission trips, our people learn, never have done deliverance, and they go out and they're casting demons out on our mission trips because there's an anointing there typically. They're under my authority. There's an authority that they receive from that, and they're able to do that, and then they grow and they learn. Yeah. So, there are books, many books out there on it, but, it's like one thing to study engineering, it's another thing to build a bridge or build a building. So you can study deliverance, but it's a whole different thing when you start doing it.
Yeah.
So the practical application is really important, and getting in a place where somebody actually understands it and you can practice it and go with them and learn from them, I think is one of the best ways. But again, know the Word, got to know the Word.
Yeah, and I think too, something to just make people aware of is like if you're praying for somebody, maybe you're just praying for them and they ask for prayer in daily life or whatever, and maybe they start to cough or their eyes start to blink real funny, or I've seen where you lay your hands on somebody and you start praying for them and they're have these really big yawns, or then something's starting to manifest. And if nobody told you that, you might not know what was going on.
Yeah.
I've even been in so many situations where we're out on the mission field, and I remember one time I was in Brazil and there was a worship service going on. I laid my hand on this lady's head. No, actually, I'm sorry, it was a man. It was a different time. But he starts bouncing up and down even crazier, and a lot of people would look at that and be like, oh my gosh, the Holy Spirit's really on him, but I knew it was a religious demon. And so I started praying for him, and gosh, to be honest, I don't even remember what happened after that.
Yeah. I've seen this especially in a lot of the countries that we go into, because of a lot of, I guess, ignorance in the area of the demonic and what's of the Spirit of God and what's not. And I've seen people that they think that manifestation is the Holy Spirit, and it's not the Holy Spirit. And I've seen people fall out on the floor and they think they're slain in the Spirit, and they're not. It's a demon knocking them out so they don't get delivered.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of spiritually discern that. So a lot of things that you see manifest, which people sometimes think it's the Spirit of God, is not.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times what people call the Spirit of God maybe isn't,
Yeah.
I'm not saying the Spirit of God can't knock you out. He can do that if he wants to, But a lot of times the demons will do that to keep you from getting delivered and to fake something so you'll leave them alone.
Yes.
And so,
I had a lady in Brazil one time. She went out on the floor, and the demon knocked her out. As soon as I laid my hands on her, and I knew it was a demon. You know what? And most people think it was the Holy Spirit.
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, you just learn over the years as you get, practical experience. You go out and you begin to discern.
yeah,
So, a lot of people, if they've not had that experience, they'll think that, that manifestation is the Spirit of God, and many times it's not. And I'm not saying God doesn't knock you out or can't do that if He wants to. He can do that. I've seen God do that with people where during the deliverance process, I know the difference when God has put somebody out, and it's kind of like a spiritual anesthetic, is the way I describe it. I can just tell, and I know God is working on them, and I just sit there and I just wait and let God, because He's doing something with them and healing them many times. You'll see that sometimes after the deliverance, and I'll know. I just know. I can't explain it. I just know. Also can tell the difference most of the time whether it's the demon doing it.
Yeah.
So that's a good point.
And I think like laughter is another good manifestation. Like I've seen laughter of the Holy Spirit. I've experienced laughter of the Holy Spirit with the genuine joy of the Lord, and it's sweet and it's beautiful. And then I've seen the laughter of mockery, and it's a demon. And you just have to know. And unfortunately, I think we just haven't accepted the fact that there's an enemy among us, and we just don't discern that many times. So, I mean, for me, I like to, if I see something, I'll just sometimes step back and be like, okay, what is this? What's really operating here?
Yeah, usually, if I see something like that, I'll lay my hands and start praying, and usually, if it's a demon, it'll finally show its true colors, and so you learn over the years, how to address those things, and so it just takes experience and a heart to really delve into it and want to help the people.
Yeah, amen. And if somebody's watching this and they start praying for somebody and they experience those manifestations, what are some of the ways that you pray to explore and kind of confirm, okay, is this the Lord, is this not?
Yeah, there's everybody, I think in deliverance ministry has tools they've developed over the years, and some that I've just learned, and I'll do things like whatever God is calling to judgment, whatever spirit God calls to judgment, I command that spirit to come up and identify itself.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I do that, and then sometimes the demons will try to take over and really violently take over the person, and when they do that, it's very difficult sometimes to get them out, because they get a lot of strength and a lot of power, and many times I will tell them to be quiet and go down, and so that they don't develop that strength and power through the manifestations. If you notice, Jesus many times He told them to be quiet. Yeah. And I think at least this is what I think, the reason that I do it is because they get strength and power the more they talk and the more they manifest. So I tell them be quiet, and and then whatever God's calling to judgment. And then sometimes if it appears that they're the kind of spirits that want to talk, I'll find out who it is. I'll say something like, in the name of Jesus, identify yourself, tell me your name or your function, something like that.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll whisper under the person will kind of whisper under their breath, and it's the demon starts talking, and then you can command it to, identify itself. Yeah. I've seen that.
You get in. Not every situation is like that. Sometimes you get demons that talk, and many times they don't. And that's something that I don't have an answer for. I don't know why that is. If there's different types of demons that tend to talk and other ones don't, or I don't know. But sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Other times I'll pray, especially if I'm having trouble with one, I'll ask God to send angels. Yeah. And they sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But I've seen the demons really get frightened when they'll see the angels come, and they'll get really nervous and mad and scared and all that. And And then I'll threaten them with angels. So if you don't behave, you know, I'm going to ask God to send angels or ask God to send Michael, and they really get upset about that. Those are just things I've learned over the years, you know, that sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. You know, it's like some tools work sometimes and some tools don't, and you have to keep probing around to find it. You know, sometimes God will show you exactly. Sometimes He doesn't, and you have to experiment. You know, and so I've done all of it. You know, it's not necessarily a set formula in how you do it. There are basic principles that you use, and but then sometimes it goes off the charts, and you have to really work at it to hear, you know, how to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. So much good stuff.
Good stuff.
Thank you for sharing with us.
All right.
And be sure to join us next time. We're actually going to be having a couple people give testimonies and talk about some even recent deliverance that they've been through. And so be sure to join us next time. And remember, you can see the 9 a.m. Sundays, 9 a.m. the deliverance class with Pastor Terry. It's about an hour long, and so he's going into a lot of detail and really going through the Word to try to prepare us all so we can do this ministry.
Absolutely.
It's so important, and there's so many people in need. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
All right,
Bless
we'll see you
guys.
next time. Thank you.
Now my guilt is gone, and my sin has been forgiven. Thank you, Lord.